there are four basic types of hominoids, four basic types, and those divisions are around size more than anything else, just size. You have the Bigfoot Sasquatch type, which are 8 to 10 feet tall and average in the range of 800 to 1,000 pounds. Then you have what's called the abominable snowman or Yeti type, and that is a distinct type. It's the only one of its kind, and they are more primitive than the others. They have different feet, and they're more pongid-like in their feet and in their behavior. They're more belligerent. So the Yeti, abominable snowman, which are confined to the Himalayas, they don't seem to be found anywhere else, just the Himalayas, but the Himalayan ranges taken altogether are about the size of the United States, so there's plenty of room. So you have now the Bigfoot Sasquatch kind, the giant kind, you have the abominable snowman Yeti kind, and they are in the man-size range, 5 to 7 feet tall, 300 to 600 pounds, but distinct. You have another man-size, 5 to 7 feet tall, 300 to 600 pounds, that generically is called the Almas because they dominate in Russia. There's the Almas, the Almasty. There are hundreds of names for these things around the world. Understand that for the four different types, there are hundreds of names. And so somebody just had to pick, so we sort of have picked the Almas as the type because so many Russians have done good work in this field. So sort of a lot of the literature was written from them about their kind in the same way that Bigfoot Sasquatch has become the name for the large one. So you have the Almas, 5 to 7 feet tall, 300 to 600 pounds. Then you have the pygmy kind, the Sidapas, the Agagwes, the Didi, around the world, and again, they are about 4 feet tall, in the range of 3 to 4 feet tall, in a range of 100 and 150 to 200 pounds. They're all powerful creatures, no matter what their size is. They're different from us physiologically. They are primates like the gorillas and chimps. They're like gorillas and chimps that walk upright. That's all they are. They have all of the outward physical characteristics of greater primates. Starting with the covering of hair, but you have the heavy brow ridges, the lack of a forehead, the large, wide, flat noses, the mouths that stick off their face in the prognathous fashion, the lack of a chin, the very short, stout necks that look like no necks almost, but it's because the muscles in the trapezius area are so much more built up because their arms are longer than our arms, and they hang down around their knees, and they're just so robust. They need more musculature. They still have the same number of neck vertebrae, but it's a different design because it's more compressed. They don't have the throat the throat design that we have. So when everybody describes hominoids, and they're seen all over the world, again, every continent except Antarctica, on a regular basis, we get about 150 good reports a year here in the States on average. So these things are out there, and the people who are describing them are describing with great consistency what they're seeing wherever they're seeing it. That much smoke, obviously, there's fire.
Now for a discovery which may surprise you. Scientists have found that most of us still have a little bit of a Neanderthal inside us. A study into the DNA of the human subspecies found that they interbred with modern humans.
The study in the journal Science is based on painstaking research into 3 Neanderthal bone fragments. Scientists reconstructed the Neanderthal genetic code and compared it to modern humans from across the globe, and found there was up to a 4% match with humans everywhere but from Africa. The theory is that our human ancestors migrating out of Africa some 70,000 years ago had some amorous encounters with Neanderthals somewhere in the Middle East.
We mean that they interbred or they had sex.
This is the first real evidence Neanderthals and humans had kids.
It's a very exciting discovery because it gives us really the first strong evidence that there was interbreeding with people like the Neanderthals. And it means that modern humans in different parts of the world may have slightly different mixes.
Now, the face of Neanderthal. This is what we're told for the most part the Neanderthals were all about. But I put it to you that it's very likely that in fact Neanderthals look more like this guy than they look like that guy. They don't look very human. You saw how lacking in humanity were the Australopithecines. They're just as bad. They have the big brow ridges, big round night vision looking eyes, foreheads that slope back, big huge wide nasal passages, four jaws that stick off their mouth in the prognathous fashion, and no chins. If you had it here, they'd have no chins. Very, very different from us.
This is the currently accepted view of what Neanderthals look like. A bit hairier than us, and with a larger nose and thicker brow ridges. But apart from that, they're unquestionably human. In fact, it's been said that if you gave a Neanderthal a shave, a haircut, and dressed him up in a nice suit, he could easily attend Harvard, although he'd need rich parents. There's a couple of things wrong with this picture. First, it's not based on any sound archaeological evidence. That's because soft tissue features like skin, hair, colour, and eyeballs are not preserved in the fossil record. The other reason is that after studying Neanderthals for 10 years, I'm convinced they look nothing like this at all. In this video, I'm going to draw on the latest archaeological, genetic, and forensic evidence to challenge all your assumptions about what Neanderthals look like. When you actually look at the hard evidence, you soon see that Neanderthal skulls and human skulls were fundamentally different. All this suggests to me that Neanderthals did not look like humans. Which raises an interesting question. What did they look like? Ultimately, Neanderthals were members of the order of primates. They were primates, and as such you would expect them to maintain the appearance of primates. Once you acknowledge that Neanderthals were primates, you start to see similarities between them and other primates. For example, when I compared the profile of a Neanderthal with a chimpanzee, they seem to fit amazingly well. My theory that Neanderthals were flesh-eating predators is supported by new molecular analysis of their teeth enamel. This reveals that the Neanderthal diet consisted of 99% meat. In fact, that's all they ate. And there's only one way to get that much fresh meat, and that's by hunting. It also seems that they didn't care where the meat came from. That's because we now know that Neanderthals were cannibals. The first evidence of this actually surfaced in 1906. Since then, literally hundreds of bones have been discovered right across Europe, bearing the unmistakable cut marks of cannibalism. My predator theory also explains why Neanderthals were so much stronger than humans. Their muscles were so large they had to have extra thick bones to take the strain. It's been estimated that Neanderthals were 6 times stronger than humans. Even a Neanderthal child could toss a human adult around like a rag doll. But there's one last adaptation that helped transform Neanderthals into such a formidable killing machine. The dark. The vast majority of land-based predators hunt at night because it's easier to catch prey when they're resting or asleep. This theory predicts that Neanderthals acquired larger night vision eyes and pupils to see in the dark. These kinds of eyes reflect light extremely efficiently. It would explain why Neanderthals had such enormous eye sockets.
Well, the eyewitness descriptions of the Almas, a heavily muscled body with a thick torso, deep-set eyes and heavy brows and very prominent cheekbones and thick jaws, could easily represent a Neanderthal.
передвигается. Чучело.
Смотри, ветки шатаются. Смотри.
О, побежал!
Пошли.
Я заснял его!
Чтоб не испугать его, пошли.
Я заснял!
Смотри.
Ё-моё!
The attack is on. To intimidate their opponents, the aggressors scream and drum on buttress roots.
Смотри.
О, побежал!
Пошли.
Я заснял его!
Чтоб не испугать его.
He's hairy and scary. Mongolians call him Almas. Russians, Almastay. Others know him as the Wild Man. He's not as famous as Bigfoot or the Yeti, but he may be something they're not. A living, breathing Neanderthal.
The so-called prehumans are non-extincted Miocene apes. Apart from their bipedality, they share no basic characteristics with humans. None. That's what I say the prehumans are. They are not prehuman. They are post-Miocene ape. They're just Miocene apes living on like they've done for the previous 20 million years. No breaks in the action for them. And we just happen to find their fossils.
Speaking of Homo sapiens, we now have seen a facial anthropologist's reconstruction of Homo floresiensis. And this is done by Dr. Susan Hayes. This is based on the primitive hominin that was found in 2003 on the Indonesian island of Flores, and it's been nicknamed the Hobbit. Now, in the new study, Dr. Hayes uses so-called facial approximation techniques to show how this individual might once have looked. A lot of times she says it's called facial reconstruction in the media, but I'm using evidence-based work, and I work in archaeology, so we call this facial approximation.
Homo floresiensis, the fossil is 38,000 to 13,000 years old, female, 3 foot 6 inches, 66 pounds, brain size of a chimpanzee, and lived in Indonesia. This is the most extreme example of adaptation and was at first thought to have had a disease. As more were discovered, this theory was disproven. It has a small brain capacity of 380 cc to 417 cc. Chimpanzees ranged from 300 cc to 500 cc, but are physically bigger than floresiensis. Its brain size is a third the size of a human's. The hand and wrist show that it could precisely manipulate items with their hands. It had long arms, flared pelvis, large teeth, large feet, and short legs compared to the body. It had shrugged shoulders, no chin, teeth similar to humans, and fully bipedal.
Let's talk for a moment about the Hobbit from Indonesia, because in all likelihood, that is one of these. It is just simply a Siddhartha Agagui type.
In January 1976, news broke of a phenomenon. Pictures showed an upright, bald ape called Oliver, who appeared to be a cross between a human and a chimpanzee, what scientists refer to as a humanzee.
When Oliver was I'd say about 4 or 5 months old, he just one day stood up, and he was always up. Very, very seldom he ever put his knuckles on the ground. If he walked like a half a block, he would walk upright. This guy, if you walk a half a block, towards the end, he's can't make it, you know. Come here, Chip. Chip, come here, son. Come on. Chippy, stand up. Up. Come on, walk. Come on. Up, 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 up.
Because of the way their hips are made, most chimpanzees can only walk upright when coaxed like this, and then only for short periods of time. Unlike Oliver, Chippy soon goes back to walking on all fours. Oliver, we know, came from the wild, and back in the mid-70s, biotechnology was in its infancy. However, in just 2 decades, cloning and animal hybridization would become a reality.
Opened and Frank Berger came out with Oliver, walking him on a chain tether, and walked him back and forth, and it was absolutely dead silent in the ballroom.
As you can see, his head is rather small for proportionate and not proportionate with his body. It's approximately 2/3 the size it ought to be. Mr. Berger, could you run him once again just so people can see that? Okay, thank you very much.
I thought that he had been crossed with a human being. I thought somehow, somewhere, someone had played a very dirty trick. And this was the remains, so to speak. To this day, I believe that there's something in there that makes him human.
If that's true, then we need to ask, is it scientifically possible for two different species to produce a hybrid offspring? Are there any precedents in nature for such a creature?
In the remote jungles of Southeast Asia, frightened locals claim to see a prehistoric throwback.
They come out of the edge of the forest into plantations.
Said to be half man, half ape, locals call it orang pendek, or little man of the woods.
This is an animal which is on the brink of extinction in this area.
Fossil evidence says a unique human species did live here thousands of years ago. But has it survived?
The thing that's so fascinating to me is the life that's been breathed into the legend, so to speak, by the recent discovery of the Homo floresiensis, the hobbit. You know, the prospect of a relic population of hominid or another type of primate might not be so far-fetched.
The prehumans are hominoids.
It seems to me that the footprints constitute the largest and most consistent body of data bearing on this question. And as such, they really deserve a concerted, systematic evaluation. In instances where we have successive footprints in a given trackway, I've been able to note flexion and extension of the toes, variation in toe position, and interaction of the foot with substrate under varying conditions.
One type of evidence in abundance is footprints. Casts of alleged Sasquatch footprints have been made from impressions all over the world. These prints provide experts with a well-known clue: dermal ridges, better known as fingerprints. One of the best fingerprint experts in America is crime scene investigator Jimmy Chilcutt. He will examine casts of footprints for dermal ridge evidence.
As a latent fingerprint examiner, I'm one of the few who is an expert in primate fingerprints.
Fiberglass brush with black powder?
I will apply the same science to the Sasquatch castings as I do to a latent fingerprint lifted from a crime scene. My study group consisted of over 100 alleged Sasquatch castings. And some of these castings were cast as much as 20 years apart. And once I established the texture and the pattern flow of this animal, I was able to look at the other castings and know what I was looking at. In human footprints, the ridges run horizontally across the width of the foot. On primates, the ridges run diagonally. On this casting, the ridges run vertically down the side of the foot. The ridges on this cast are about twice the thickness of a human print. Now, these casts were cast 20 years apart and hundreds of miles apart, yet they have the same ridge texture and ridge flow pattern.
Studying the giant-sized footprints allegedly left by Sasquatch is Jeff Meldrum's specialty. He's studied hundreds of them and found the distribution of sizes follows a pattern identical to a real animal species.
This is exactly the type of data we would expect if we were, in fact, sampling a real population.
This is the ankle position of the Laetoli tracks. Again, just to remind you, ankle up, heel widened, it's very similar in its own way, very similar to the way a hominoid walks, to the way Bigfoot walks. Isn't it? Pretty easy to see. Next slide. This is Grover again, showing how Thus, the Sasquatch foot at a given stature has just a trace over twice the surface area of a human foot. Next slide. And we see this famous picture, I think, of Roger Patterson's foot with the Sasquatch from Bluff Creek. We see that comparison that we just saw. Next slide. Now we see a couple of other Sasquatch tracks, Bigfoot tracks, hominoid tracks. Now, anybody recognize these? They look a little different because they come from clay in a floor of a cave. But does anybody recognize where these come from? Where these hominoid tracks come from? Torriano, Italy. Right. And what are they? They are Neanderthal tracks. Neanderthal tracks. They are considered to be Neanderthal tracks because they were in a cave and they had Neanderthal artifacts around, and they are considered to be Neanderthal tracks. And yet, what do they look like? Smaller versions of this. In fact, they think maybe it was a male and a female, as were the tracks at Laetoli 3.5 million years ago. 30,000 years ago, 3.5 million years ago. Male and female again. And guess what else? Does this one look familiar? Next slide. Three and a half million years ago, 30,000 years ago. Australopithecine, Neanderthal. Pretty doggone close to the same. Is it not? Is it not? So, if we can make the case, that Neanderthals were hominoids right up to us, then you can also make the assumption that right on through down, right on into the Miocene and right on out, hominoids. Upright walking bipedal apes. Turns out we have, of all things, complete Neanderthal feet. No other pre-human do we have the complete feet. We have complete because they buried a few of them toward the end. They may have picked up burial from Cro-Magnons, or Cro-Magnons might even have buried some of them. But somebody buried them, and we have their feet. Here we go, human Neanderthal. Take a look. Look at the heel, the extension, versus the human. The settling of forward of the ankle relative to that. And look, this is where you really see the difference. Look at the stability and the width of the forefoot, the shortening of it, and the widening of it. And understand, you're looking at muscle going all the way around here. You're looking at a big, thick foot. The prehumans are hominoids. This is Bill Munn's Gigantopithecus reconstruction based on the evidence of just the jaw. That's all we really have. But notice how much it looks like what we imagine a Bigfoot would look like. Next.
Hello, I'm M.K. Davis. What you're looking at there is one of the exceptionally clear frames from the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot film taken in Northern California along Bluff Creek in the late 60s. Now this is a frame that was prepared for publication, and it's of excellent quality. What I wanted to do is just show you some things that are on it. For instance, let me just zoom in. And you can see quite a bit of features on it. I mean, you can make out the basic features, the nose, the mouth, the place where the eye is supposed to be. You know, the sun's coming kind of at an oblique angle to the face. It's illuminating the side of the face pretty good, coming from down like this right here. And the eye socket is in kind of a shadow.
As a result, the footage was submitted to experts in various fields. Among them was Janis Prohaska. Active in the motion picture industry since 1939 as an impersonator of animals of the ape family, Mr. Prohaska was convinced that Roger Patterson had filmed a living, wild creature.
The movement is the only thing what throwed me a little bad, because he moved a little bit more like a man than an animal. Because you could see all the muscles on the body and the whole movement. It didn't move like a costume at all. And the size of it was enormous big size, so I don't know if they find a big man like that.
Mr. Prohashka, you mentioned that the creature did not move, as if it were a costume. Do you think it would be possible to create such a costume?
That would be a difficult... I don't think so. Because that costume, if it would be a costume, that would have taken such a long time to put the hair. You should put the hair by glue them on. That would take about 10 hours, the whole makeup job. And it looked to me very, very real. I'm doing this since 1939, and if that was a costume, that was the best I have ever seen.
Ian Redmond agrees. The film seems too realistic to be a fake creature, created by a rookie filmmaker.
The bits of the anatomy just look very convincing. There appears to be shorter hair, slightly lighter hair around the waist. It just looks like the way a silverback's back narrows in a little bit and has that short hair there compared to the longer hair on the arms. It just looks like a silverback. And in 1967, most people had not seen photographs of gorillas. I think it's a very exciting bit of film.
Hello, I'm M.K. Davis. The film clip that you're about to see is a clip from the Patterson film that I reconstructed. I call it the Patterson film Illuminated. If you'll look, it looks like it's got a cloud of light around her as she walks, and it's some enhancement that I did that was rather labor intensive, and then I had to reconstruct the film again with that in mind. So you should see the Patterson film if I'm able to successfully, convert it to the right media. You should see it in unprecedented clarity, and with YouTube being as good as it is in high D and everything now, maybe perhaps the quality will hold till you get to see it. But this is some pretty good stuff. Now I notice you can see a lot more things on it. Look at the right hand and see if you can see it open and close. And just look for muscle movement and just the flesh of the leg shaking as she sets her foot down heavily, that sort of thing. Also, pay attention to the left breast. Watch it kick up independently of the right one, and also the hair on the side of the head behind the ear as she turns her head back forward again after looking back at the camera. Notice there's a good bit of a hair behind the ear along the jawline. These are the sort of things that I noticed, and I'm sure there'll be lots of things that you notice too. And if you see, whatever you see, let me know what you see. And this is some interesting stuff here. At any rate, thank you for your time.
Animals are there at home in their environment, and we're often the intruder, the visitor, and evading human detection is not that difficult.
We know virtually nothing about gorilla fossil history because they live in forests, and in forests fossils don't form very well. There's this scrabble for nutrients. An animal dies, it decomposes, and all the nutrients go back into the trees or other animals, and you don't get fossils.
The summer travel season is nearly here, which means millions of people will be heading for national parks and national forests. As it turns out, a few of them won't be coming back.
Each year, hundreds of people are reported missing in our parks and forests. Most are eventually found, but there's a smaller category of cases that never get solved, including a few close to home. The I-Team's George Knapp is here with the story. George.
It's not a revelation to say that people get lost out in the wilderness or in forest areas. We're talking about a different kind of mystery, though. Disappearances that are not caused by predator attacks or criminals hiding out there in the woods or just bad luck. A former cop has put together hundreds of case files regarding clusters of missing persons in national parks where the circumstances are flat out strange. But don't expect any answers from the Park Service.
At the end of the night, I was staying in a motel off the government or off the Park Service land and get a knock on the door.
The person who confided in law enforcement veteran David Paulides was a government employee who told one heck of a story about people who vanish in national parks, places like Yosemite, but also national forests, including the Toyabe, west of Las Vegas. In the years since the knock at the door, Paulides has scoured small-town newspaper archives and pestered federal agencies for records. He found so many cases of missing people that a planned book became two, filled with more than 400 cases of people who went into national parks but never came out.
People disappear in the wilds all the time, and we're talking about something different. These were unusual things that don't make sense, that happen to cluster together in 3 to 4, sometimes as many as 20, 30 people missing at one location.
The individual cases are strange enough, Paulides says, but stranger still were the reactions of federal agencies when he asked for public records.
And when we FOIA'd them, we got a response back that they don't keep any lists of missing people.
The response was not only no, but hell no, he says. So he began putting his own list together and discovered what appears to be nearly 30 clusters of disappearances in national parks and forests, cases which meet a narrow set of odd characteristics. The people who vanish often do so right under the noses of others, in many cases of kids, their parents' noses.
Being parents and being responsible people, we understand there's no way my son or daughter wouldn't know the way back from being just down the road getting the ball.
But it happens all the time.
It happens all the time.
The missing defy logic. They hike uphill, for instance, often steep climbs. Children as young as 2 or 3 are found a day or two later many miles away and over mountain ranges.
Some kids are found in phenomenal distances away that would make no logical sense to any parent.
Weird things happen to their clothing. The missing often shed their clothes right away, even in bad weather. Clothes are found sometimes neatly folded, but not the people.
The ranger described to me, if you were standing straight up and you just had your shirt or just had your pants on and you melted directly into your pants, that's what it looked like to him. The pants were laying on the ground in a very neat pile.
The missing defy normal search and rescue practices. Bodies are found in places that are all but inaccessible, or they're found in the open, in areas that were repeatedly searched earlier. Bloodhounds or other tracker dogs are often befuddled.
If the dog can't find a scent, that's a red flag. If a dog, a canine dog, a trained dog, is put on the scent at the point last seen, and it lays down and it doesn't want to track anymore, red flag. And that happens more than you think.
Nevada doesn't have a major cluster, but it has plenty of cases. Children who vanished around Lake Tahoe, in the center of the state near Tonopah, and at Mount Charleston. In 1966, 6-year-old Larry Jeffrey of Henderson disappeared while playing with his 2 brothers, setting off a massive 16-day search by as many as 1,000 men. Former Sheriff Ralph Lamb remembers it clearly.
Walked away from camp. Never did hear from him, never did see him, never did find him. We had hundreds of people there working, almost shoulder to shoulder.
There's no large predators per se. So we can't worry about mammals taking him. And he was in a fairly remote area where there's no vehicular access, so there's no car abduction. This boy just walked into oblivion. And in an age where you have aircraft up looking for the boy, you have 800 people scouring the mountain,
you should be able to find him.
That coupled with, if he was deceased, part of that ongoing effort is bringing in cadaver dogs. The odor coming off the body, they should have found that. They didn't.
Other aspects of this mystery are even more bizarre, though difficult to explain in just a couple of minutes. Example, many of the vanished who are found alive are kids too young to speak, or kids who can't communicate because of disabilities. Some who are found alive say they can't remember what happened to them. In his books, David Paulides reports on why some obvious explanations simply don't apply here, but he stops short of giving his own theory or explanation. Paulides says he doesn't want to scare people away from visiting parks, but thinks people need to be made aware. A month ago, we asked the Park Service and the Forest Service for their lists of local missing persons cases. Still waiting. We have links and more information about all this stuff on our website. Check it out.
Eyewitnesses report seeing an ape-like creature that walks on 2 feet and is 6 to 9 feet tall, with an estimated weight of 800 pounds. The hair-covered muscular beast is surprisingly agile, with a loping gait and a long stride. It is most often seen along the coastline and around the rivers of this water-rich island. Native legends tell vivid stories of these formidable monsters that stretch back centuries. It has many names: Bokus, Tsunakwa, Mowglis, and Sasquatch, and it's a beast to be respected and feared.
Myth and legend is one of the ways that oral history has been passed on.
Dr. John Bindernagel, a wildlife biologist, has been on the trail of this creature for more than 30 years.
Much of the myth and legend is storytelling for a purpose. Like people say, oh yeah, Tsunakwa, she was the bogeyman. Parents told their children, don't wander into the woods, you'll be stolen by a Tsunakwa, which may have been partly true. The fact that she was used that way does not invalidate.
Do you know of any stories of Bigfoot actually killing somebody? Any stories or?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Up in British Columbia, an area where people disappear, and they find their bodies occasionally, and their heads are off. They don't find the heads. And that's one of the, you know, they got a little too close and a little too unfriendly, and they got a big gun. Well, yeah, they have killed people, generally in self-defense. They know if you're around, and they'll see and smell you and hear you long before you're in their immediate area. And so they have a variety of ways of stealth, and one is just blending into the trees and bushes. Basic, you know, black ops stealth that
to fear what you do not understand. You lock it away in cages to keep yourself safe. This way you don't have to learn its true nature, but not everything can be caged. Since the first of our people walked this land, we have always understood the great spirit of the forest and how to live with it. I've always understood the forest better than the civilization your people imposed on the land. In the forest, my people knew we had a future, the way things had always been. Our lands had always provided for us. Those days are long gone. The buffalo, once spread wild across the land, are gone. The mighty wolves now live in cages. Like my people, are only a shadow of what we once were. Slowly this land has been consumed by your cities of steel and cement, but there is still one that'll never be caged. A secret the mountains and the forests still keep. They are the master of the woods, the shadow guardians, the boss of the mountains. They are called by many names by many tribes. The elders speak of them with respect, for they are the ultimate strength of the forest. These stories have been passed down from our ancestors for generations to have the wisdom to understand the forest like no civilized man could. My grandfather would speak of them as shadows. No one can catch a shadow or lock a shadow away. He would say, it is the wise man that knows they must be left alone. This is simple knowledge that your people never learned. You cut down the forest, dam the rivers, and fence the plains like prisons. Sasquatch watches you as you cut down his home and wound the great spirit of this land. There is no room in your cities of glass and steel for them. It is easier to dismiss them only as stories, but they are real. Real as your shadows, and always watching.
Prospector Albert Ostman, in 1924 was camped near Toba Inlet in British Columbia. While asleep in a sleeping bag, he was picked up and packed several miles. Daylight found him in a small valley encircled by cliffs. This was home for a family of these creatures. He was able to escape after 6 days by getting them sick on a box of snuff. Now let's listen to Mr. Ostman's experience.
Well, there was 4 of them, and none of them look alike. There was what I call the old man, because I had no scale or any rules for measurement, but he was at least 8 feet tall, and must have at least 800 pounds. But the what I call the old lady, she couldn't have been over about 600-700 pounds. She was probably 7 feet tall, and they were all covered with hair.
Among the Wenatchee tribe, Sasquatch was known as Coanito, which in their language means night people. A group of male members of the Wenatchee tribe were on a hunting trip near Wenatchee Lake. One of the men became separated from the rest of the party and was captured by Coanito. He was taken to a cave far up in the Rocky Mountains and held captive by a family of Coanitos. Aboriginal people from throughout North America have stories about Sasquatch. Pictured above is an image of a Clark-Yolk-Buquis. The Tsimshian called them Boas. Though some anthropologists assert the stories about Sasquatch are legends, many Aboriginal groups feel the creatures are living, breathing beings. One of the most noted Sasquatch-related artifacts is this Sasquatch mask created by Ambrose Point, a Cherokees native, in 1938. An artistic rendering of Sarah Finn Long being carried away by a Sasquatch. She was held captive for almost a year by a young Sasquatch and his elderly parents. She constantly pleaded to be returned to her people and was eventually taken back. The Clark-Warkawak believe Sonequa the Wild Woman was a cannibal who stole children. Bukwa the Wild Man is known as an evil spirit who lurks on the edge of the forest. He is known for leaving out his favorite food cockles to lure any wandering natives and snatch them and bring them to his underground lair. In Kwakwaka'wakw mythology, the wild man and wild woman are ancestor to the Namgis tribe through their son. Many other Native Americans have stories of wild men stealing Native women. Some Kwakwaka'wakw had very unusual features. Look at the way the forehead slopes back from their brow.
It's a debate that's engaged scientists for 100 years or more. What's our link with Neanderthal man and woman, and moreover, did we ever mate?
It's a very exciting discovery because it gives us really the first strong evidence that there was interbreeding with people like the Neanderthals. And it means that modern humans in different parts of the world may have slightly different mix. And it means that modern humans in different parts of the world may have slightly different mixes.
I know that Indian people believe that he's a brother, and that's how they view him. And as an anthropologist, what I study is the culture that holds this animal in high regard in many different forms. And so seeing Bigfoot through their eyes is where the anthropology comes from, where you're not judgmental, you're not trying to make their stories fit my view of the world. I want to see it through their eyes and how they've had a relationship with this animal or this brother for 10,000 years, if not longer. And what can those stories tell us about that relationship and what it is and what he is and what can he do?
Well, I think that brings me to a core question I had when I was reading about your book, Giants, Cannibals, and Monsters, is that there are some native traditions that think of Sasquatch as a cannibal, and I thought that was interesting because that would have to, by definition, would put Bigfoot in the same category as us, because otherwise it wouldn't be a cannibal, it would just be another predator. It would be some species, as a predator. But in order for it to be a cannibal, it would require us to be in the same club. So, which group was that, by the way, that thought of Sasquatch as a cannibal?
Almost all of them.
Really?
The battle won, a grisly scene unfolds. An enemy youngster has been caught and killed. The carcass is shared between members of the group and eaten. Killing a competitor makes sense if you want to protect your food supply. But exactly why they cannibalized the dead chimp is not fully understood.
Remember, the Neanderthals were cannibals. The Neanderthals were coincidentally hair-covered hominoids, nocturnal cannibals with big feet who kidnapped human women who gave birth to 7-foot-tall Cro-Magnon. Here is a Neanderthal and human. This was the offspring, Cro-Magnon man. Let's look at some Cro-Magnon skeletons. Notice the eyes near the top of the head, heavy brow and cheekbones. To the left is a Neanderthal, to the right is a Cro-Magnon. This is a so-called modern human versus the hominoid. People who do not have strong hominid genes will have different features such as long forehead, pointy chin and weak brow and cheekbones. This is a depiction of how Cro-Magnon man lived. Let's compare Cro-Magnon to Native Americans. For the comparison, first let's look at the soup. Chief Sitting Bull compared to a Cro-Magnon facial reconstruction. Notice the eyes, nose and mouth are in the same position. Notice the eyes near the top of the head, heavy brows and cheekbones. This is Chief Bigfoot. I wondered how he got that name. Maybe he had big feet. The first thing I notice is how long his fingers are. This is Bigfoot's brother, touches the clouds. He got his name from his enormous height. He was known for his giant frame and great strength. The Iroquois were known as the giant of the forest. The men could chase deer all day without fatigue. One man near 7 feet in stature runs down a buffalo on foot as he slays it with his knife or lance. The natives had superb bone structure and were clean and muscular, commented early European settlers. Look at the 2 Iroquois men in the back. They are estimated around 7 feet tall. For that to be accurate, the man second from the right would have to be 4.5 feet tall. To 5 feet tall. The Neanderthal is ancestor to all European people through interbreeding with migrating Africans. So why is it absurd for migrating Asians to encounter Neanderthal-type beings when they first traveled to the land? Notice the eyes near the top of the head, heavy brows and cheekbones.
Our scientists believe there are most likely 2 explanations for Bigfoot, if it exists. The first is that it's a giant ape descended from a prehistoric creature called Gigantopithecus. The second, it's an unidentified species of ancient human, possibly a Homo heidelbergensis. And that's not all. Native American stories of Sasquatch describe hairy, rock-throwing men, which closely match the description of heidelbergensis. The tribes of the Pacific Northwest also report the Sasquatch's attraction to human women. These stories stretch back centuries, but even today, they remain protective of women when they believe Bigfoot is at large.
When non-tribal people visit those locations where they take special care and they escort the females back to their vehicles and make sure that they are safely off the reservation. And I've personally been escorted off a reservation because they believed that there was a Bigfoot in the location.
Some First Nation legends go as far to say Sasquatch had children by human women.
There is oral tradition that it's happened in the past. They do talk about that offspring have been produced and the child will only usually live a very short period of time due to rapid growth. It's usually very slow, can't learn the language, doesn't learn any traditions.
But if Sasquatch really is a heidelbergensis, mating with a human might not be as far-fetched as you might think. Recent genetic research has revealed early modern humans mated successfully with Neanderthals.
Bigfootology just completed their rendition of the Bigfoot/human hybrid known as Patrick. They've been documenting and investigating cases of where human Bigfoot hybridization may have taken place. One particular story that stood out is about a Colville Indian bride who was purportedly kidnapped by a Bigfoot in the late 1800s. The tribe thought they had lost her for good until she was spotted gathering roots. Apparently, she was pregnant with Patrick the Bigfoot's child. According to legend, Patrick was a half-man/half-monster hybrid. Patrick was ugly. A tiny troll of a subhuman hybrid. He was humpbacked and only 5'4" tall with arms that hung down to his knees. There was a sloped forehead, a large mouth, and a large lower jaw with protruding teeth. He grew up, being considered quite bright and affluent, enough that he found a wife and lived a successful married life. He reached the ripe old age of 30, and was buried on the Colville Reservation. Remember the age 30 because it will come up again.
In the pursuit of the Sasquatch solution, many of the Indian tribes, the Native Americans, told me that kidnapping of women was a consistent and common problem in days of yore. Kidnapping of Native American women by Sasquatch, and resulting in pregnancies and all sorts of illicit things. Okay, well, assuming that that's true, yeah, this is what I'm referring to right here. The unusual length of the fingers compared to the palm of the hand. And why I'm making an issue of that is because in that area, there is some evidence for an unusual group of people. This is found in a cave in Utah, and you can see this is a normal handprint, and then you have these abnormal ones. You see, they were done at a different time. Let's see how well that shows. See the normal print, and you see the unusual hand, finger to palm ratio.
As Oliver reached sexual maturity, it wasn't simply being house-trained that singled him out from other chimps. He developed an interest in Janet Berger.
You know, I always thought he was a cross between a human and a chimp. I did. The way he acted, I've been around chimps all my life, and he was altogether different. And his problem was, when he was 16, then he wanted to make love to women, you know. He'd get a hold of you, couldn't get away from it. I'd holler, help, Frank. He didn't bite or nothing, just going to hug me and kiss me and whatever, you know.
Professional pianist Vincent Pace was a friend of the Bergers and had known Oliver for years. He knew that Oliver's sexual advances towards Janet were becoming serious and that something had to be done.
She went in this particular day and he became aggressive, and he turned her around quickly, put her head down, bent her over, and he mounted her.
A Chinese villager claims to have been kidnapped by the Yaren Chinese Bigfoot. The hybrid could not speak and only lived till 30. Same age as Patrick the Bigfoot human hybrid. Remember when you looked at this next alleged hybrid, that the first generation Neanderthal human hybrid was 7-foot tall Cro-Magnon man, remarkably eyes near the top of the head, heavy brow and cheekbones.
猴娃的小名叫犬子，大名曾繁盛，已经30岁了。猴娃不会说话，只能喊出几种简单的声音。更让人惊奇的是，30岁的猴娃从小到大，不论寒暑，从来都是这样赤身裸体，但是他却从来也没有生过病。录像中怀抱孩子的就是猴娃的母亲。对于突然来到的王方辰等人，他3缄其口，一语不发，而猴娃的父亲也始终不肯面对镜头。对于这一点，和王方辰同去的孙志勇记忆犹新。
我们进去之后，就是喊可以进来吗？可以就是在门口嘛，就我们想跟你聊聊，可以不可以啊？然后半天都不出来人，然后他父亲呢出来，在隔着门跟我们说了几句话，然后我们呢就把我们准备的礼物送给他之后，才让我们进去。 院的一个问题。他母亲呢对这个我们的到来呢很不高兴，就是很不喜欢我们看。
对侯娃身世的回避，更增加了大家的好奇心。难道他们真的有什么难言之隐？在与侯娃父母的交谈中，侯娃开始接近大家。在这个时候，王方辰才有机会仔细地观察他。
赤身露体，脑袋很小，个子也显得高，胳膊长，然后他总的架势老是半蹲的这么一个架势。
This is the Alma picture I was telling you, representing Zana, the famous one from Tikhina in Russia that lived in the village for 40 years and produced the 8 offspring, 4 of which lived to maturity and whose grandchildren and great-grandchildren still live in Russia to this day. You talk about a documentary screaming to be made, crying out to be made. I've got a Russian friend in London named Andrew, and he has got connections in Russia, and he is a filmmaker, and he is just dying to do this. He can make it happen. But again, and I'm sure Lauren and anybody else here can tell you, to get the money for a documentary is hard just to begin with. To make one about something like this, it's so volatile. But it's unfortunate because it's a great story, crying out to be told. Next slide. This is the skull of her son, youngest son, Kvit, which I think looks significantly Neanderthalish, heavy brow ridge, sloping forehead, big nasal opening, but it does have a human, though heavy, a human jaw because it has a chin. Grover thought this was just a, we got in a kind of an argument about it. Grover thought it was just a variation on the human theme. Well, tell you what, I'm glad I never played football against that variation on the human theme. Because I think he could...
He's in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. He has successfully mated 2 species to produce hybrid offspring called ligers. The laws of nature apply to big cats as well as primates. Genetically, ligers are 50% tiger and 50% lion.
Here on my right, we have a Bengal tiger. She's about 1.5 years old, and she's got that bold black and orange striping. And then on my left, we have a young lion about the same 1.5 years old, who you can see has a much more tawny pale coat. And obviously the mix of the two right here, or the shadow striping and his bold markings, show us the liger. He's a liger because his father is a lion, his mother a tiger. Boy.
That's the baby. Now meet the adult. If you haven't come across a fully grown liger before, then this is the largest cat you're ever likely to see.
Come here. Samson, hup, hup. Down, down. It's theorized that ligers are this enormous size because the inhibitor growth gene exists in the female lion and in the male tiger. So when you switch around and you get a male lion breeding with a female tiger, creating the liger, you get this gigantic size. Nothing tells it when to stop.
There are many jokes about people behaving like Neanderthals, but it seems the joke could be on us. Research has found that many human beings actually have Neanderthal DNA, proving there's an evolutionary link.
The Neanderthal, that beastly evolutionary outcast, thought to be extinct for 30,000 years. But scientists believe they've picked up the trail of that hairy historic reject in the most surprising of places.
In us, many of us anyway, there is new evidence that humans inherited up to 4% of our DNA from Neanderthals.